Hello my loves, what is up? So tonight I am coming to you all with a book haul. Now before I get into all the gems that I found, I want to say that you do not need possessions to make you happy. You do not need to be constantly buying things, and I understand that. I do not spend my money on many things. I do spend it on books. I spent less than $50 and I've got a fair pile. I have a fair pile of books because I do not buy books often, and when I do buy books, I pretty much only buy them secondhand or they're gifted to me. I find them at op shops where they're just sitting around collecting dust anyway. They're books that I will want to read at one point in my life, and I do not have the means to be buying all these new books constantly. I collect books secondhand. I pay a much cheaper price. Also support a charity. I get to have this selection of books which I know that I want to read one day. So when I do want to read that book, it's on my shelf. I already have it. I don't have to go splash out $20-$30 for this new book, because new books can be insane. And I love classics. A lot of classics can be found in bookstores, a lot of poetry and a lot of non-fiction. So let's get into it. Firstly, I'll show you a gift. It's this gorgeous edition of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. And I think it's just gorgeous. It's hardcover. It has some illustrations inside. And I've actually not read Wuthering Heights, so I'm very excited to read that one. The rest of these books, nearly all the rest of these books I got out of my hometown. We went road tripping today and stopped at a lot of op shops and a lot of secondhand bookshops so that I have reading material that I'm interested in and I don't have to sell my kidney. First, Margaret Atwood, it's dark. The Circle Game. Have I heard of this? No. I will buy anything Margaret Atwood. There's even some poetry in here. You know what I love? I love finding bookmarks. What people use as bookmarks. Isn't that just gorgeous? Like I love to see what people keep in their books. So we've got an introduction and poems is the rest of it. So a small poetry anthology, which is super cool. Next up, another poetry anthology. It's published through the city of Melbourne through a company, Rabbit, and it's called Issue 10. This one's Gravity. There's photographs, there's stories, there's explanations, and there's also what looks to be a little bit of experimental poetry, which like I can't turn down, because these are the things that you have to spend an arm and a leg on Amazon or some other random online bookstore, and it costs like $30 for the book plus $20 in shipping, and you don't even know if it's going to be worth it. Next up, another author by author, Ali Smith. This one is The Accidental. I'm currently reading Ali Smith's like autumn winter books. I'll put a picture. And I've also read How to Be Both by Ali Smith, and I loved it. And I literally want to read everything that she's ever written. I think she's a genius. I'm just gonna say that she's a genius. Next up, a small non-fiction work, Charles Darwin on Natural Selection. I think that's will be a really interesting introduction to Darwin's work, because I haven't really read much, so I need something to get me into it. Another poetry anthology, New and Selected Poems. This one is gorgeous. Gold from the Stone by Lehman Sissay. Lehman Sissay. I'm not sure. 17 when he wrote his first poetry book, which he hand-sold to the miners and millworkers of Wigan. Since then, his poems have become landmarks sculpted in granite and built from concrete, recorded on era-defining albums, and declaimed in over 20 countries. Wow. That's really cool. So I'm excited. It's also like really floppy, which we love. Next, another non-fiction work. This one's kind of random. I do like to pick up the random ones. I will give anything a go. This, if you can't read it, it says images in an antique book, but it's actually Dante and Shakespeare. So it's a discussion of Dante's influence on Shakespeare's works. So like basically, well, what I can tell from the contents page is that it's going through pretty much every play. Macbeth, King Lear, Measure for Measure, and looking for Dante's influence. And then there's some kind of general comments, which I think is really interesting. Two huge classic writers that made a huge impact on literature, on society, whose works are really prevalent, and how they interconnect, and I think that's really interesting. Next up, we have The Prime of Life by Simone de Beauvoir. Another non-fiction work. If you don't know who Simone de Beauvoir is, she's a French-born philosopher. Yeah, that's right. She wrote The Second Sex about women, and this is the second volume of her autobiography. So I think her autobiographies really go through like everything in her life. So that's the second half, because I'm sure I'll find the first half somewhere. I didn't actually realize it was the second half. I clearly didn't look hard enough, but great to have in my back pocket for when I want it. Death of a Salesman, a short, it's a short play. I freaking love plays. They're so fun. They're so cool to read. Like, it's just dialogue. Like, you can't get bored. I always remember Alice in Wonderland, like, looking over at her sister's book and she's like, there's no dialogue. Like, that's so boring. Yeah, girl. I get you sometimes. Sometimes we need a bit of dialogue to really spice up our lives. This one is a poetry anthology. It's called Path, and it's poetry and drawings by Cherry Tennant, which it's like this gorgeous cover. What? Like really awesome illustrations. It looks really cool. Like, it's just really cool. I think this is also independently published. 222 of 400. Only 400 copies, and I have 222. That's so interesting. Also Australian, which we love. We're like halfway. This was a big book haul. I did say that. I do not encourage consumerism, but we have purpose. Like, the cover just intrigued me mainly. Printed by James Cook University Printery, which, wow, so interesting. But I love a good bit of Australian poetry, and like maybe this will turn me on to something. There's also some really cool illustrations again in this one. Maybe this will turn me on to something really interesting. There's also there's obviously poetry, some experimentals, some essays, some like artworks, some articles. Like, this is just really interesting. And I am currently studying writing and editing in Melbourne at RMIT, and they do things like this as well. I want to see what like other kinds of universities are doing in this field. I find it really interesting. Okay, a book that I actually read in the car today was Unfurled by Penny Riley. Now, this one, like, come on, it's got to be self-published. The font, can you see that? It's like Times New Roman plus a word font. And like there's mistakes, like there's a couple of mistakes, like not that that's a big deal, but actually reading the back, Penny Riley seems to be quite accomplished. She's written a fantasy fantasy series, and she now lives in Dalesford, which is really cool. Her fantasy series was Silver Threads. I've never really even heard of it, but it was really interesting to read her perspective. She's a druid, so a different perspective on religion and society and culture and spirituality. I have a couple, I tabbed quite a lot actually, ideas mainly to come back through. I wouldn't say I loved the writing specifically, but I did like the ideas, just not the exact way that they were executed. It just didn't hit home for me, but there's definitely a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom and a lot of thought that's gone into this, and I found that really interesting. I smashed it out in like an hour and a half, which is crazy. Next up is a tiny little baby called Life in Australia, and it's about orchards. It's by Oxford University Press, and it's just this gorgeous story about orchards, and there's all these illustrations, and it's just gorgeous. And like, why would I not pick this up? You know what I mean? It looks like they have a lot actually. Food, kangaroos, koalas. I'm very curious as to the background of this, of why it was printed. So I'm curious to both read and to look into that one. Next up, a classic, Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. As I said, classics are everywhere at op shops or thrift shops, and it's like a perfect way to find classics because you don't have to spend a heap of money on this book that you might not like, or you might not want to finish, or you might not want to read. And if you're going to places like Salvos or Uniting Care or any like general op shops, they're donating the money to community and they're assisting community and using it to buy food or resources. So if you buy a book for $1 or $2, you read half of it, or you read 25 pages, or you read the whole thing, you don't love it or you don't want to keep it for whatever reason, even if you did like it, and you donate it back, they can continue making money off this thing. Other people get to read it, you get to share it with other people, and money goes back to community, and this doesn't go to waste sitting on a shelf somewhere, or sitting in a pile in the back of someone's house, or sitting in a pile in the op shop. People actually get to read it, and that is another classic. This one by Anne Bronte, which I've never read anything by this Bronte sister. I believe she didn't write much. This one is called Agnes Grey. There's also illustrations. I'm such a sucker for things with illustrations. This is not one I picked up today. That's what I'm reading, Brave New World. This, a book I've actually already read is The Longest Memory by Fred Doguer. I'm sorry, I don't know the pronunciation. It is really good. It is a novel. I don't know, it's like a novel, but it's also, it was in the poetry section, which is really interesting because some sections are written in verse, so that's why it was in the poetry section. But there's also sections of prose. See, here's the section of verse. There's also sections of prose. There's sections of essentially diary entries, as you may say. A school book for an English class that I wasn't in. It was a mainstream English class, so I didn't read it. But I'm always curious what people read because they're always talking about it, and like, I want to know what's happening. I finally read it and I actually really enjoyed it. Okay, we're down to the last couple. I will say there is one book in the car. I will put it here. I will try to put it here because I left it in the car and I'm not going back out to the car to get it. And that was The Victim by P.D. James. It was a Faber short stories, you know, those like tiny little ones. I freaking really enjoyed it. I also read it today in the car, and like, it was like 35 pages, but it was a really powerful story. It really covered a lot of ground and covered a lot of time, and I actually felt like I kind of got to know the character, even though I'm pretty sure they were unnamed. I love those Faber little stories. It's great. I picked it up for $1, and they're usually like $10 to $15, which is still very affordable compared to regular prices of novels or of like full books, but getting it for $1 is even better. A Penguin Classic edition of Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater. I'm really curious. It's a classic, I'm gonna like it. That doesn't always happen, but I'm gonna get something out of it, and I think that's the main thing why I enjoy reading classics, because there's something to get out, because they weren't a money-making endeavor most likely. In the contemporary realm, they can be like just kind of lacking in substance. Even if I don't enjoy it, at least it has substance. I love contemporary books. As You Like It, I'm on a mission to read all of Shakespeare's works. A non-fiction, Jane Austen's novels. Cool. A study in structure. I'm so interested in the structure of novels. But there's also stuff about themes, indirect commentary. We did study Northanger Abbey as one of my year 12 texts. Oh yeah, and then it goes through each of the texts. That's really cool. For the fact that it was like $5, it saves me like rummaging around on the internet, finding things that aren't helpful or that are difficult to understand or that don't really give me full information or good sources. Obviously, you can't trust everything that's published as a book. Like, there's gonna be mistakes or there's gonna be misinformation. But if someone's gone to the effort to put together like a full-length book on the structure of Jane Austen's novels and not just like written a blog post, it says something, doesn't it, about credibility. Last one. This was a gift my mum got me. It's called In My Skin. It is actually by an author who studied the same course as I am currently studying now, and she also studied professional writing and editing at RMIT. Oh, it's a memoir. That's really cool. Memoirs are so interesting because it's like such a like little dip into someone's life. Her story of her as a prostitute, which is cool. I'm curious. I'm interested. I'll read it and see. I'm interested to see the style that she picked up. So that is my book haul. Thank you all for coming and listening to me ramble about these books. I hope it inspires you to get reading maybe one of these books, maybe one of the books that you already have on your shelf, or head down to your local op shop and peruse the shelves and see what you can find. Happy reading!